What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you what I can only describe as quite possibly the most boring video I've ever made, because it is about my schedule. In all seriousness though, I don't expect this video to do particularly well, however I am going to add it to the channel FAQ playlist, as the reason I'm making it is to answer some questions that I get fairly regularly, kind of about how I juggle various game releases and things, which just so happens to coincide with one of, I would say, probably the busiest weeks in terms of game releases that I have seen since I've started doing this full time, with about 5 games that I want to cover releasing over the span of like 3 days. And while that's a very extreme example, some people have often asked me in the past how I deal with even like 2 or 3 games releasing within a day or two, that kind of thing. And obviously, that's what I'm here to answer for today. So, I do want to kick this video off by saying that I love what I do. Basically, every day that I get to do this is living my own dream. It has already been so much more than I ever thought it would be. And it has given me some incredible opportunities to do some incredible things that the 12-year-old version of me, who wanted to go around hanging up flyers about how I could help people with video games via guides and things, would probably never believe. But I tell you all that to just point out that this is not a complaint on my end, just a bit of logistical reality in terms of actually making these videos, especially the reviews in particular. Because ultimately, time is a resource. I only have so much of it, and there is a never-ending amount of work to do in the video game space, even after you cut out all the things you're not particularly interested in personally. And while it may very well seem like an innocuous thing, everything you do is going to cost you some amount of time. That's not a bad thing. Choosing to do nothing will also cost you time because that's how time works. But in my case, at least, a lot of this starts with simply understanding how much I can work, what I can reasonably get done generally, my own skill level with various games, things like that. So at a very baseline level, this entire process begins kind of at the beginning of the year, usually in January, when I will take a stock of everything that is planned or coming out that I'm going to want to cover ahead of time. Obviously, there will be curveballs like announcements, shadow drops potentially, things like that, but at the very beginning of the year, I like to get a rough outline of more or less what is going to be releasing that year so I can get an idea of what my year will look like in terms of new game releases. Now that is then going to fill up some of the calendar straight away. After that, I usually pick out a bunch of older games I want to take a look at. Now, the first couple years I was doing this full time, I ran through the games I wanted to play most. Games I had missed for one reason or another, and that kind of, I would say, filled in a lot of the gaps for me personally, but these days, it's really just kind of anything that looks interesting that I think I may have something interesting to say about or be able to simply provide some context or a video that is of value in some way to someone. And so far, that very simple process has gotten me through hundreds of game reviews. In fact, the longer this continues to go on, the more statistically likely it becomes that I have reviewed more games than most people will ever play to begin with. But I digress. 9 out of 10, that simple process is going to allow me to sort out my schedule, kind of realize when I can do certain things, and while obviously that's not an exact science, some stuff may go faster or take longer than I expect, it's a good rough outline for what the year is going to look like. And now that the channel is big enough to get review keys pretty reliably, I can usually plan for at least some of those as well. So far, so good, but obviously the trouble starts then when games are releasing all at once. Now this happens frequently at the beginning of the year and towards the end of it when a lot of games are fighting for prime release windows basically. That is to say, all the games that are trying to capitalize on just before the holiday season when people are buying a lot of things generally, and then usually post-January like February and March is usually where a lot of games will try to capitalize on all the people who are coming out of the holidays looking for something to buy, that kind of thing. And so, strangely enough, it's not uncommon for a lot of games to be clustered together right there in terms of release windows. And that is then where things become a bit of a sort of priority system based on, what I want to play, what is important to cover generally for the channel, what people want to hear from me the most about, that kind of stuff. And while it's not an exact science by any means, I kind of wanted to walk people through that and explain at least some of the reasoning that goes into some of these things. Now, generally speaking, the games that I am the most excited for are obviously what I am going to prioritize if things are releasing in quick succession. Another big aspect of it, though, is what do I have review keys for? Sometimes, believe it or not, the question about which game to cover first or which to prioritize answers itself, because I will get review keys for one and not the other, and in some ways that actually makes my life a little easier, because then I can just focus on the one I got the review key for and wait for the other one to release. Now, luckily for me, at least, with the way that I have structured my reviews and things, I am not particularly concerned about hitting like review or release embargoes. It's great when I can make it happen, obviously, but it's never been like a make or break thing by any means. Now, another thing to consider when these games overlap like this is what is actually new versus is something like a remaster, that kind of thing. I tend to try to focus on the new releases, mostly because people are going to be talking about them, looking for information for them, and generally prioritizing those is obviously going to go over better for people because that is actively what they are looking for, and that's, just kind of how YouTube works as a platform. So if I've got like a truly brand new release versus something that's like a remake or a remaster, typically the new release will take precedence. But even then, that's not necessarily universally true, which is where the wiggle room comes in. Because, as a very easy example, we had the release of Oblivion Remastered earlier this year, and I think just about everybody at this point knows how much Oblivion means to me. And also, it's a big Bethesda game, and those tend to have a lot of interest naturally. And so, while I didn't really have to worry about it, thanks to its release window, if this was competing with something else that week, I likely would have prioritized Oblivion. So far, so obvious, I imagine. But another, little factor in terms of picking what to review when is actually the length of the game. This goes back to kind of just being able to gauge and know what I am capable of doing. I do this a lot. I generally know what kind of games are going to take me the longest. And if I'm looking at two games, knowing that one of them is going to be like a 100+ hour thing, and one of them is just a small narrative experience that's maybe like 15 to 20 hours, I'll probably take a day or two to knock that smaller one out first before switching my attention over to the big thing that's going to take more time and energy and focus. And while that is probably easy enough to understand, I figure why not give you guys a working example of what this upcoming week looks like and how I chose to prioritize things. So, I have to be a little bit careful here, I can only talk about so much of this, but this upcoming week, starting basically tomorrow, sees the release of things like Ninja Gaiden 4, Bloodlines 2, Dispatch, Avernum 4, The Outer Worlds, and even a couple things beyond those. I want to cover all of those, so how am I going to do that? Well, that's where that priority system comes in. The Outer Worlds 2 and Bloodlines 2 are the ones I am the most interested in. People are aware that I got a review key for the Outer Worlds 2 already, so that is obviously my priority, and it works out because I did not get a review key for Bloodlines 2, which means I have to wait for the release date to even begin that anyway. But then on Tuesday, we see the release of Dispatch and Avernum 4 Greed and Glory on the same day. This is slightly more complicated because while Dispatch should be, I would imagine, a relatively short narrative game, it also has the added curveball of being an episodic release, meaning that you're not going to get all of the game on the 22nd. It's actually going to release more of the chapters every week until it fully releases in November. That means what I can do basically is drop a first impressions for Dispatch relatively quickly based on the early parts of the game that are releasing, and then worry about the full review later once all the content is out and I can actually properly review it, having seen what it has to offer. But then that leaves something like Avernum 4, which is a remake of an older title, and while I am very interested in it, having played the original 3 in anticipation of it releasing, unfortunately it gets caught in the middle of all these other releases that are new releases, and Avernum 4 has been out for a while. And with all these games getting clustered so close together, it is unfortunately the one that has to get pushed back a bit. So hopefully with that you can kind of see just how shifting priorities change based on the individual situations, how I tend to prioritize things, but ultimately I would say it comes down to a mix of experience having done this for a while, but also just understanding what I can get done, what I know I can do, what has worked well previously, that kind of thing, and that's kind of how I navigate these more extreme situations where it's so many games immediately back to back. All of that said, that's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. I would say, unsurprisingly, most of this just comes down to time management and priorities and having to set them, but again, this is something people actually ask me pretty regularly, so hopefully that answers your questions, I guess. But if you have more, by all means, drop them down in the comments section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.